Hayao Miyazaki has officially retired with his final Studio Ghibli film, The Boy and the Heron, released July 14th, 2023. This is the studio's 24th full-length film, with 12 of those films directed by Hayao Miyazaki himself. When I found out Mr. Miyazaki was releasing his final film, I thought to myself, I'd like to sit down and enjoy all of his films in chronological order before I watch The Boy and the Heron. Mr. Miyazaki is one of my favorite directors of all time. Not only his skills in animated filmmaking, but just in cinematic medium as a whole, he's truly a genius. So in today's video, I'm going to be sharing every single Studio Ghibli film that came out in chronological order, and maybe even a couple fun facts along the way. But keep in mind that Studio Ghibli is a huge studio with a lot of other directors, and although this is Mr. Miyazaki's retirement, there are probably going to be more Studio Ghibli films to yet be released. The problem is, Mr. Miyazaki is by far the best and most creative of those directors when it comes to Studio Ghibli, and that's exactly why we're going to cover and honor his legacy right now. Studio Ghibli was founded on June 15th, 1985. However, Hayao Miyazaki had been directing for a long time before that. He's done plenty of co-directing up to this point before he actually directed his first film, which was Lupin III: Castle of Cagliostro in 1979. This then led up to directing his next film, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, in 1984. However, this is where it gets a little bit tricky since the film made its debut in March of 1984 and Studio Ghibli wasn't even established until 1985. So I guess the question is, does this count technically as a Studio Ghibli film? I'll leave that part up to you guys. I say yes, mostly because it was also included in the Studio Ghibli DVD collection. Following Nausicaa was Miyazaki's second film in the Ghibli lineup, Castle in the Sky, in 1986. 2 years later, the studio released Grave of the Fireflies in 1988. However, this film was directed by Isao Takahata, a co-founder of Studio Ghibli. I am going to list every single film that Studio Ghibli has released, but if you guys want a more thorough list of Mr. Miyazaki's work, I'll put that down in the description below. A month after Grave of the Fireflies, the studio released one of their greatest films ever, grossing an outstanding $1.1 million in 1988, My Neighbor Totoro. The very next year, in 1989, was the release of Kiki's Delivery Service. I actually hope you guys are starting to realize how much this studio was working back then. They were pumping out so much in the late 80s, early 90s, it was actually incredible. Yet another film by Isao Takahata, Only Yesterday, which made its debut in 1991. A year later, Miyazaki then released Porco Rosso in 1992. 5 years go by that another Miyazaki film is released. However, in that time, the studio released 3 films: Ocean Waves in 1993, Poco in 1994, and Whisper of the Heart in 1995. This then leads us to my personal favorite Studio Ghibli film of all time, Princess Mononoke in 1997. Isao directed My Neighbors the Yamadas in 1999, and in 2001 we get the studio's golden child and masterpiece and the highest grossing Ghibli film of all time, Spirited Away. 1 year later, Miyazaki releases The Cat Returns in 2002, followed by Howl's Moving Castle in 2004. Pretty much at this point, anything Miyazaki touches becomes an absolute masterpiece. 2 years later, Tales from Earthsea comes out in 2006. However, this one was directed by Goro Miyazaki, Hayao Miyazaki's very own son. Which is actually kind of gnarly because this is the first film that he directed and it is the second worst Ghibli film of all time. We'll get to the worst one in a minute. A swift turnaround with Ponyo in 2008, which made a worldwide success. 2 years later, in 2010, was the debut of The Secret World of Arrietty, which was directed by Hiromasa Yonebayashi. Goro Miyazaki makes a tough comeback with the direction of From Up on Poppy Hill in 2011. Still nothing compared to his father, who directed The Wind Rises, which came out 2 years later in 2013. The Tale of the Princess Kaguya, directed by Isao Takahata, additionally came out in 2013 as well. Hiromasa Yonebayashi releases When Marnie Was There in 2014. And finally, we get the worst Studio Ghibli film to date, directed by Goro Miyazaki again. Not a great track record, my man. Earwig and the Witch in 2020. Which leads us to right now, Hayao Miyazaki's final film, The Boy and the Heron. I hope you guys have grown to love and respect the world of Studio Ghibli as much as I have throughout the years. And I am curious to know down in the comments right now, what is your all-time favorite Studio Ghibli film, and if you are excited for The Boy and the Heron. And if you guys are interested in more videos similar to this, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll catch you guys on the next one.